Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Welcome back to the Story 516 podcast. My name is Zach, and today I have another returning guest, Jared Purdin.
Hello, I am Jared.
Hi, thanks for joining me. We're kind of in a little mini, I almost want to say arc of 3 episodes. Last time I was able to share about the meaning behind the name Story 516, what that means to me, how I came up with that idea, like how it's guided the vision of this podcast. Today, I really wanted to talk about kind of resilience, but also finding those voices that speak to you. So, a little bit about kind of what that means is, resilience means resilience, which will come up, I think, a few times in today's conversation. But finding voices that speak to you or speak your language is kind of a way that I've understood it. Is a lot of times in whatever Christian circles you're in. For myself, I was in certain Christian circles where certain speakers, preachers, thought leaders were popular. So they were the ones that were continuously being referenced by pastors, youth leaders, small group leaders, etc. And sometimes those voices didn't connect with me, or they didn't really, like I say, speak my language. And at times I was left kind of thinking, hey, what am I doing wrong? How am I doing the Christian life wrong? Because clearly I'm not connecting with these messages that these people are saying that a lot of people around me are really connecting with. And I know we went to college together, and I'm sure, I don't remember the specific conversations, but I know we've talked about this, or where we would hear certain speakers or ideas, and there'd be lots of discussion about, oh, this is the hot new speaker, or this person I didn't really understand, but maybe everyone around us was really loving a certain talk or book. Yeah, I'm trying to keep this as open as possible without like labeling a bunch of specific pastors and preachers, because I want to leave space for you who are listening to be able to kind of put your experience into this story. But I don't know if, Jared, if you had as much of that as I did, where there were books or preachers that were popular among certain circles, but they just didn't connect in the same way to you.
Yeah, I can think of kind of first really starting to take my walk with Jesus a lot more seriously when I got into my teens, specifically when I went to college when I was 18. I remember experiencing this whole buffet of different types of Christianity, especially at college where you have Lutheran groups, you have evangelical groups, you have Baptist groups, you have Pentecostal groups. And I remember kind of dabbling my foot in a bit of all of them, kind of coming into college like a blank slate to an extent and saying like I just want to kind of figure out what these groups are all about, also while reading the Bible and trying to get a feel for what seemed biblical. And it does seem to me like there's teaching, and there's kind of those issues in which Christians all do need to understand or at least have some agreements on, and then there's flavor, right? And it does seem like we ought not to attack each other, or we ought not to go after each other for flavor. For some people, when it comes to their walk, it might be that they really find a lot of value in kind of their quiet time, in maybe their reading of the Bible quietly, maybe like praying in private. And again, I'm not saying these are things that people shouldn't do, but I'm saying that it might be with certain personalities, maybe more introverts in this case, that they really take a liking to that. For others, it's that's a lot of community time. It's spending a lot of time with other believers, doing a variety of different things. And then to take it even to a different direction, it's also about some of the teaching we like to listen to. I used to listen to Timothy Keller, who has passed away, but is a great orator and great at explaining biblical principles and what he believes in, but he usually did so in a very kind of stoic, like matter of fact way. He did include emotional stories for to be certain, but he himself was not a very emotional speaker, not that I can ever recall. And to me, that was somebody I actually really clung to, where I know for other people they might have been looking for something with more energy. And that is perfectly fine. I know that as well. Something that helped me in understanding a lot of this is just how Christianity is a big tent, and a lot of people have a bunch of different personalities. And just because you have one personality type does not specifically mean that everybody has to have that personality type to be a Christian. I mean, I would say, Zach, what are some of the things that you kind of came to realize? Because I remember us having a lot of discussions in college and beyond about your personality and other people's personalities, and kind of, there's that term Christianese that you use for like words that we as Christians
Right.
might use that
Right.
non-believers don't understand. What are some of the realizations that you probably came to over the years, in which you realized that maybe when one person said one thing, what they really meant was this, or vice versa, or ways in which you can, I should say, try to translate what other people are saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know one element, and I think this is where maybe resilience comes into play, because I would find myself, and I mean, like, I guess to back up just a tiny bit, I think a lot of this topic for me stems from my own mental health journey, and being someone who's dealt with depression and anxiety quite a bit in the past, and still today, but in a much more healthy way. I've had a lot of growth and experience dealing with it. But I would find a lot of responses to those topics from Christians to be lackluster. And I think the resilience of just not giving up and still trying to push through, both resilience that God gave me, but also I think the resilience of friends like you, many of our other friends, many of whom have been on the podcast, staying involved in my life really, I think, helped create that determination to stick with it. So I was able to keep searching for understanding, I guess, in different ways. So one of the things that I think brought extra understanding was something that you were talking about, how some people, I don't remember exactly what you just said, but some people would find reading the Bible or Bible study or maybe worship or these different ways of connecting with God. And I really found that's probably one of my more early memories of finding explanation or a framework to understand how different people connect with God to be really helpful to me. Because I remember there was like this one, I mean, you could probably find on a quick search online like 15 different how to connect, like the different ways people connect with God. And I really connected with, okay, nature, the arts, those are two of the stronger ways that I connect with God. Whereas I have Whereas I have friends who are more into sitting down and just quiet time and prayer or doing worship along with their church. So lots of different ways of connecting with God, and that piece of understanding I think really helped me navigate some of that. So when I encountered someone giving a certain piece of advice, I could be like, have some understanding of, okay, me knowing this person, knowing their walk with Jesus, they're much more into that like uh deep dive study into the Bible. That's how they connect with God. So they're pulling these like really deep concepts out or theological topics out, hoping that that will help because that's helped them, which is understandable now. Um Maybe it wasn't as understandable kind of walking in the thick of suffering and trials. But I think the other thing was just that I kept searching for different voices. You mentioned Timothy Keller, and he is definitely one that has been, I think, maybe the most impactful. I guess I could make the argument C.S. Lewis was most impactful because C.S. Lewis was probably the most impactful Christian thinker for Timothy Keller. So, tomato, tomato. But I found that like there are certain Christian speakers that had that kind of artistic bent or like literary bent, maybe, where they were students of both the Bible, but also students of literature and were able to pull examples and create frameworks pulling from classic stories, archetypes, mythologies to help give illustrations on how to understand a story from the Bible or the Bible. And I found that really helpful for me.
Yeah, it seems like to me, specifically, since this is about resilience, talking about all the different ways in which we as Christians can kind of understand that Christianity is a big tent, and Christianity has so many different people with so many different personality types with so many different interests that really it's not hard. Or I should say this. I should say it. Hopefully, we should be able to find things in which we can, and ways in which we can worship God and get to know God that aren't all looking the same. It's a rich tapestry type of idea. I always kind of like to make analogous the idea of our relationship with God to a marriage relationship. And having been married for a while and now having a kid, it's always interesting talking to other married people because a married person might say, like, well, we make sure that on every Monday we have a date night. And if, we have to have that date night on Mondays, and that's the way that me and my wife basically keep our relationship fresh. And those are things that really help us. And that's fantastic. Me and my wife have been married now for 15 years, and we've never had any specific day that's kind of a date night. We will have times like we did recently where it's like, oh, we have free time. Let's go to Denny's and eat breakfast with the baby for the first time, right? And so we will be intentional to do those things, but we don't have it scheduled or strictly listed, right? Much kind of like how we have our responsibilities with each other. We do those things, and if something ever becomes a problem, we talk and we try to speak in love to each other, but we don't have things necessarily as nailed down as I know some other married couples do. And it seems like to me, much in again the same way as the person's relationship with Christ, it seems like to me that you ought to always be intentional about being in communication with that person in terms of understanding that person and in terms of doing things with them. But some people's relationships are definitely going to be a lot more structured, I guess if you want to say that, especially at certain times in their life. And other people's is going to be more go with the flow. And so I think that's something as Christians that we need to understand. We don't, yes, we ought to be being in communion with God. Yes, we ought to be, doing things like reading the Bible and other things like that. But it's also the case that everybody's personality is a bit different and everybody's life's a bit different. So if somebody says, oh, I read my Bible in the morning, and maybe you don't feel well because you didn't read your Bible this morning. I mean, there could be some truth to that, but it also could be true that at times we just have bad days. At times we just have good days. We just need to remember to bring all that to God, and that'll help us to be resilient in dealing with any of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do like how this topic kind of connects to the last episode's topic of the meaning behind the name Story 516 and some of the heart behind me starting the podcast. Because some of the heart was for myself, I was lucky enough, I was blessed enough to have the strength and wherewithal to continue pursuing and looking for those voices in Christianity, those preachers and speakers who I understood, who would speak to me. And then I would find them like Tim Keller, C.S. Lewis's, a lot of his writing, um, some other people like a Brant Hansen or a John Eldridge who just they had a way of speaking that just connected with either what I was directly going through or with an element of my own personality. So I was lucky enough to have the resilience and fortitude to keep pressing on and searching for them. I don't know if everyone, um I guess not everybody has the same story as I do. So part of my hope with this podcast was bringing in a diverse set of voices to talk about their experiences seeing God at work in the world and hearing recommendations that they have for how they connect with God or how they see God at work in this area or this area. And that this podcast could be an easier way where someone who's on their own search and on their own journey trying to find those voices that speak to them might be able to listen to just one area of this one podcast and be presented with a buffet of ideas. Um, and kind of, I really like how you initially talked about it, where it was like flavor, different flavors, um, which I thought was a really cool metaphor. It made me think of Ratatouille for some reason, but I don't think I have a really great connection for Ratatouille to here. But, and this is the movie, not the dish, just to clarify for anyone who is not familiar with Pixar. But I like that idea of flavors where it's kind of that top layer. Like you have the dish, you have the nutrients, which is Jesus, which are trusting in the Bible, which are trusting in these. I know we've talked about them as like close-handed issues, the things that you will plant our flag on the ground, die on this hill defending. But then you have all those other things of maybe like, what type of music do you listen to? Are you infant or adult baptism? Who preaches? How often do you do communion? All these things that are the flavor, the dressing on the dish itself. And I think finding, like, that's where finding the voices, like you want the voices you listen to have those solid core elements, but it's a lot in that the flavors where you find the voices that really connect, are able to convey those deep truths in a way that you understand clearly. So yeah, thanks for stopping by to talk about this. I would just like want to leave the audience encouraging them to continue to be resilient, continue to search for those voices. Think about Joseph. He was in Pharaoh's prison, in Pharaoh's prisons for a long time. He was a slave for a long time. Like his journey from kind of, from receiving his dreams and visions from God to the fruition of those was years. So sometimes journeys take a very long time. The Israelites were in the desert for 40 years. So it's a matter of being resilient. A mentor of mine recently told a large group of people in a talk he was giving, that there will be a harvest if you don't give up. And that was based on a verse from the Bible. I don't remember the specific reference. If you know the reference, drop it in the comments below on whatever platform you're listening to this show at. I'd love to have that reference again. But there will be a harvest if you don't give up. So I think that's totally about resilience, and just staying true, staying the course, and you will reach your destination.
Yeah, I agree. I would just echo that. It's when I think of resilience, when I think of the archetype of resilience, it's hard to think of anything other than Jesus on the cross. We talk about joy, and that being essentially the joy that Jesus had when he was on the cross. But I don't imagine that he was smiling and happy, right? He was resilient as he went through, knowing that the plan that God had for him. That's what I think of when I think of kind of the apex of what resilience looks like.
Yeah, that's a great image and a great kind of example to leave us with. So thanks for stopping by, Jared.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.